Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. But what I want to do today to lead the show, rather than just doing our week one picks, like we got Friday's show to really break down the games, also obviously the college football betting show with Aaron Torres, what I want to do is talk about 10 things that we should learn in week one of college football. What do I mean by 10 things we should learn in week one of college football? Well, in terms of what I mean by that, basically it really boils down to this. College football is no different than any other sport. We love it, we follow it, we consume it, we spend all offseason thinking about. And once last season ends, once this season begins, you go through spring, you go through fall camp, you have kind of an idea of what to expect from certain teams. And sometimes in week one, that team does exactly what you expect, and you look really smart, and you say, you tell your buddies, I told you that team stunk, or I told you that team was better than you thought, or that defense stinks, or that offense is going to be really good. But then there's also plenty of examples where stuff just happens that you can't anticipate. And so what I want to do is go through the big games, the big matchups, and some of the big storylines in the big matchups going into week one and tell you 10 things that I think we'll learn. And what I mean by, and to kind of wrap before we get to the 10, I want to be clear on one thing. This is not where I make up hypothetical things that could go wrong. This is not going to be, we learn if Lincoln Riley's built the next great power at USC, if they put up 60 points on Rice, and if they only put up 30, it means that they stink. This is not, we'll learn if Marcus Freeman can coach. Well, Ohio State's a 17-point favorite against Notre Dame, and so I don't think if Notre Dame loses by 25, that's kind of what we expect. So I don't think we're going to learn anything about Marcus Freeman. But I do think we're going to learn a little bit about Ohio State. I do think we're going to learn a little bit about Utah, who is going to Florida. And I do think there are quite a few other things that we will learn going into week one or coming out of week one. So let's get into it. Here are the 10 things that I think we will learn coming out of week one of college football. Number one, I think we're going to learn really quick if Ohio State's defense is actually improved or not. And listen, if you listen to a show like this or really listen to anything college football related in the offseason, this is one of the single biggest conversations that has happened this offseason as it pertains to the big picture of college football. Is Ohio State improved on defense? And if they're not, what does it mean for college football? Because while the Ohio State Buckeyes are obviously always one of the premier programs in college football, always talked about, the last couple of years it hasn't been pretty on defense. Last year, they finished ranked 59th nationally in total defense. The year before, 60th nationally in total defense. And really, if you watched Ohio State over the last couple of years, it's been pretty clear, right? If they score 40, they're going to beat you. They're going to win, but it might be too close for comfort. And if you can somehow slow down that offense and you can do what Michigan did last year, what Oregon did last year, even what Utah did in a loss in the Rose Bowl last year, and that is run the ball right at them, they really have no answers. And so why it's interesting and why we'll learn a little bit going into this weekend is for two reasons. One, Ohio State brought in a new defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, who had a top 10 defense at Oklahoma State last year. New defensive coordinator, new scheme. I heard Ryan Day say that his team looked violent in practice over the last couple days. That's probably a good sign if you believe what the head coach says. But two, why this one is especially interesting to me is for the following reason. It is because if your defense is improved, I know Notre Dame's a top 5 team in the country, but there's a reason that, as I just said, Notre Dame's a 17-point underdog coming into this game. If your defense is actually improved, Notre Dame is actually a team that you should see it against. Now, that's not a criticism of Notre Dame. It's not to say they're overrated. It's not to say this, that, the other thing. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame has a first-year quarterback. Notre Dame lost a 1,000-yard rusher in Kyron Williams. Notre Dame lost its best wide receivers. Now, they do have a great tight end, Mike Mayer, coming back, but their leading returning receiver had 27 catches last year. One of their best offensive linemen is banged up and might not even play. That does not sound like a team that should go into the horseshoe on Saturday night and go score for score with Ohio State. And so why I believe we will learn about Ohio State in this defense is because this is a game where if you at home cannot get stops, if Notre Dame runs the ball right at you, that is a really bad sign. I think Ohio State wins no matter what, but I do think there are two very different conversations coming out of this game depending on how the game looks. If Ohio State wins this one 45-17 and it's never really that close, then I think we sit back on Monday and say, you know what? That defense is improved. They did exactly what we needed, and that team might be good enough to win a national championship. But if that final score is Ohio State 45, Notre Dame 38, then that probably means that it isn't going to be very much better against Michigan or Michigan State or Wisconsin or Iowa or some of the other teams that Ohio State plays this year. Again, I don't think Ohio State's going to lose. But if that defense isn't improved, I don't think they can win a national championship, and I think we will learn a little bit about them. Let's keep it going. The number 2 thing that I think we will learn this weekend in college football, it is whether the Pac-12 deserves our respect this year or not. And listen, you guys and girls know the deal. I live in Pac-12 country. I have, for the most part, been a defender of the Pac-12, but a couple things stand out. One, the reason the Pac-12 doesn't get the respect that it craves, I don't want to say the respect that it deserves because I don't think it deserves more respect. The reason it doesn't get the respect it craves is because they simply do not win enough big games on neutral fields, road games, home games, whatever. They don't win the games that matter. USC might finish with 10 wins in some years, and believe it or not, they did under Clay Helton, but it's never the big out-of-conference games. It's never the big bowl games. Same with Oregon has lost a bunch of early regular season games. Now, Ohio State last year was the exception. Then they come out and they lose a couple games that they shouldn't. The point I'm trying to make is that the Pac-12, to get the respect of people in college football, you've got to win big games. And I would argue that this year, it is more important than ever before because we don't know what the future of college football looks like, right? And that to me is why this weekend is so interesting with Utah going to Florida and Georgia playing Oregon in Atlanta on Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening. Why it's so interesting is because we don't know what the future of college football looks like, but what we do know is that whatever the postseason looks like and whatever the broader picture of college football looks like, it is going to be run by the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't know whether we're going to end up with 12 teams in the next version of the playoff or 16. I would venture to guess that significantly more than half of them will come from the Big Ten and the SEC. And so if we have a, say, 12-team or let's just say 16-team playoff for simplicity's sake, I think we see 4 or 5 SEC teams and 3, 4, 5 Big Ten teams. Well, if you're not part of the Big Ten and you're not part of the SEC, what is the best way to prove that you belong in a postseason where you can compete for a national championship? Oh, it's to win big out-of-conference games, and that's why I think it is so important this weekend for these two teams. Now, I don't think Oregon is going to beat Georgia, but I will say Georgia lost 15 guys off last year's team that are in the NFL now, or 15 guys that are drafted, I should say. So it's not as though they're the Georgia from last year. But then, two, on top of that, I would also say Oregon, Dan Lanning's a former defensive coordinator. I think Oregon can make it respectable. I don't know that they will win that game. I don't think they will win that game. Utah, though, I hate to say it, there is a lot of pressure on Utah going down to the Swamp. Now, I know what a lot of people would sit there and say. It's the Swamp. It's Florida. It's an SEC team. It's a SEC home game. It's a night game. If you lose, whatever, it happens. I actually completely disagree. Utah is a preseason top 15 team. Utah is a team that a lot of people, myself included, believe is good enough to make a college football playoff. And I don't know if win a game there, but make a college football playoff. Well, Utah, if you want to be taken seriously as like an up-and-coming program and a force to be reckoned with, you have to go to Florida and win that game. And you have to go to Florida and win that game for this reason. These are not the vintage Florida Gators. First-year head coach, quarterback who has thrown 66 career passes in Anthony Richardson, and I know he's really talented, but 66 career passes. They're coming off of a 6-6 regular season where Dan Mullen got fired. And so I'm just sitting here saying, if you're Utah, if you're the Pac-12, if you want respect, you can't go to SEC country and completely fall apart against the 5th, 6th, 7th, I would argue somewhere probably between like the 7th and 9th best team in the SEC this year. Florida's not better than Bama, Georgia. I don't think they're better than Kentucky, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Arkansas. So you get pretty far down the list, Texas A&M, before you start talking about the Florida Gators this year in college football. So if you're Utah, if you're the Pac-12, if you want respect, you're sending your best team into SEC territory against a team that you should beat. You're a slight favorite. That is a game that you have to win. Let's keep going. Number 3, in terms of the things that I think that I will learn and I'm most excited to learn in week 1 of the college football season. Is Georgia the next Bama? And what I mean by that is not like, are they going to win another title? Are they going to compete at the highest level? All that stuff. But as I told you, Georgia plays Oregon in Atlanta. I think they're going to win. I think it's going to be probably somewhere in the double figures. But why I bring it up is because we know that Georgia won its first title in 40-something years, and they believe they are now ascending to the top of the sport where they are going to compete every year, year in and year out, with Bama and with Ohio State. And so when I look at Georgia, are you really on Bama's level, or did everything just break right last year? Because think about Bama. I remember I've been doing this for a long time, essentially since Nick Saban got to Alabama. I've been in some form professionally covering college sports. And I remember those first 3-4 years when Nick Saban really got it rolling. Every offseason, you would look at Bama, their roster, who they lost to the NFL, and you'd sit there and say, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year somebody catches Bama. And every single year, it would not happen. And every single year, you'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter who Bama loses. As long as they have Nick Saban, they are going to recruit at an elite level. They are going to replace the players that they have. And they're not going to miss a beat. They might not win a championship every year, but they're going to be in the conversation. And then it comes down to, if you catch them at the right time in the right year, are they maybe a little bit banged up like they were the year that LSU took them down in Tuscaloosa? Not to discredit Joe Burrow and crew, but Tua was less than 100%. But the point is, Bama every year is at the top of the sport, and now it's up to Georgia. Georgia, I know you lost 15 guys to the NFL draft. I know you lost 5 guys in the first round. That's never an excuse at Bama. Remember, Bama lost 6 first-round picks last year, including the Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith. They replace him, have a new Heisman Trophy winner, and make the national championship game after winning the SEC. Well, Georgia, if you're on that level of Bama, you don't miss a beat. You come out, you beat Oregon, and you get things rolling. I do tend to think, by the way, that Georgia is basically already at that level. You go back the last 5 years, they've won 4 SEC East regular season titles. The year they lost to Bama in the title game, they lost to LSU, or they lost to Bama the following year. They lost to LSU. Then Florida was in it. Then last year they go back to the title game. So 4 trips to Atlanta in 5 years. I kind of think they're already there, but I just bring it up to say that Georgia, if you want everybody's respect, and if you want to be talked about, I don't want to say everybody's respect, I take that back, but if you want to be mentioned in the same breath as Bama, every year a title contender, go out, smack Oregon, and show everybody it doesn't matter who you lose, we're the freaking Georgia Bulldogs. Last one, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back with the back half of the things that we will learn in week 1. I think we're going to learn what kind of program the Cincinnati Bearcats are. Okay, so Cincinnati goes to Arkansas. How about them Hogs? Big pig invasion, all that good stuff. And Arkansas is about a touchdown favorite. And I actually, I like Arkansas coming into the year. We've talked about him on the show. I think KJ Jefferson is maybe the most underrated quarterback in college football. They bring back a lot on the offensive line. They've got some nice transfers. I like Arkansas. Cincinnati, though, to me, is one of the more interesting teams coming into college football, and here's why. We all remember last year's dream season. We all remember going to the college football playoff. We also remember them getting smacked by Alabama in the college football playoff, and there's obviously no shame in that, right? Alabama just beat the crap out of them because that's what Alabama does. They have more bigger, stronger NFL bodies than any team in college football. But what's interesting about Cincinnati, I don't think people realize this. They had 9 guys drafted off of last year's roster. They had, obviously, look, Sauce Gardner was the 4th overall pick. Sauce Gardner ended up with the New York Jets. Desmond Ridder, their quarterback, was drafted. Jerome Ford, one of their running backs, was drafted. Their other defensive back, their other corner, Kobe Bryant, was drafted. And believe it or not, this is like one of those stats that sounds made up, but it isn't, is they had the third most players picked in the 2022 NFL draft was the Cincinnati Bearcats. The only schools that had more players picked than Cincinnati were LSU, were Georgia, obviously, we know that, and LSU. That sounds absolutely crazy. Cincinnati, the Bearcats, had more players picked in the 2022 NFL draft than Ohio State. They had more players picked in the NFL draft than Alabama, than Penn State, than Oklahoma, than Texas, than Tennessee, than Wisconsin, than Michigan. And I understand, they were a veteran team. Alabama was young. Ohio State was young. So I'm not sitting here like, oh, they passed Ohio State as a program. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. But Cincinnati is not a program that's supposed to have 9 guys picked in one NFL draft, 5 in the top 100. Only that's exactly what happened. And now I'm curious to see what happens next. Because remember, Cincinnati next year is going into the Big 12. And Cincinnati is going to have to compete for at least a year or two with Oklahoma and Texas. But then going forward, they're going to have to compete with Oklahoma State, with Baylor, with Iowa State, with some of the programs in that conference. And so where I'm intrigued, are they a program where everything broke right last year? They had the right guys at the right time. The right guys came back for that extra COVID year. Or are they really like a sustainable program? You go to Arkansas and win that game. And I know Arkansas is in Alabama. It is in Georgia. That says a lot about your staying power as a program, especially when you remember the fact that, again, they lost 9 guys to the first round. 9 guys in the NFL draft. 5 guys in the first round. I don't think they go to Arkansas and win. But you go to Arkansas and get that W. That shows exactly who you are as a program, and exactly how far you've come. I don't think there's any shame if they lose and it's not close, but I do think it shows an awful lot if they do end up keeping it close or potentially pulling an upset.